Now we interrupt our regular programming for a special coverage of our breaking news coming out of Syria that we brought you earlier. According to U.S. official, missiles have been fired from U.S. Navy destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean against a Syrian airbase near the city of Homs. For more on the story, we go live to Damascus to talk to our correspondent, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad, what more can you tell us?
Yes, there's nothing official coming out yet from the Syrian government side, but according to U.S. media, there were over 50 Tomahawk cruise missiles that were fired from two U.S. warships in the Mediterranean Sea. The missiles targeted a Syrian airbase believed to be Al-Shairat, a Syrian airbase close to Homs city in central Syria. Now, definitely, this is the first direct U.S. attack against a Syrian military target since the start of the crisis over 6 years ago. Definitely, this development is a dangerous development. It seems that it will be escalating the situation on ground, further complicating what is happening in Syria. As you know, this is the first time that the U.S. targets Syrian military targets across the country over here, and definitely many experts believe that this would could actually lead to direct confrontation with whether Syria or its allies, Russia in particular. And at the end of the day, whatever happens after this kind of a strike, direct strike by the United States, will definitely lead to more escalation and more complication for the situation on the ground, and definitely will put more and more obstacles in the face of any kind of a political solution or political talks, at least between warring sides in Syria, the opposition and the Syrian government. Once again, this is the first U.S. direct strike that targets Syria. Of course, it comes, according to U.S. officials, in retaliation of an alleged Syrian chemical attack, which Syria denied fully in Idlib's Khan Sheikhoun. We know that there was an alleged chemical attack over there, and the Syrian government was blamed by Western countries, on top of which the United States. This attack comes after deliberations, after talks in the White House, between top officials in the White House. There are reports suggesting that we could be hearing and seeing a statement coming out from U.S. President Trump. We still don't have a confirmation on that, but for the time right now, we can confirm that there is no yet any official statement, whether by the Syrian government or by the general command of the Syrian army and armed forces.
Mohammed, all we know at this point is that the Tomahawk missiles were fired at an airbase near Homs. Do you have any more information about the target?
Yes, the target, according to some reports that preliminary reports that came out, could be Al-Shairat, Syrian-controlled airbase, which is near Homs in central Syria. This is definitely, it would be, if this is true, this is a main airport used by the Syrian government in the fight against terrorism, whether the Al-Nusra Front or Daesh. We cannot confirm that yet. This is only according to reports, as the attack happened just about 30 minutes ago. There is nothing for sure, especially that the Syrian government did not release any statement regarding what was the target or what happened, at least during the past hour or two.
Mohammed, a U.S. defense official has claimed that the missiles were fired at an airfield where the Syrian government based its warplanes used in the alleged chemical attack. And we know that a few years ago, the Syrian government eliminated all its nuclear weapons under the UN supervision and under the supervision of international organizations concerned.
Yes, definitely. Chemical weapons, not nuclear weapons. Yes, the Syrian government dismantled all of its chemical arsenal. It was dismantled with international supervision, and it was destroyed, of course. This is according to official statements by the Syrian government. Today, or at least, let's say, in the past 24 hours, Syria's foreign minister Walid al-Muallim held a press conference on that topic, on the accusations against the Syrian government on that chemical attack, and the foreign minister confirmed and reiterated that Syria has never used and will not use chemical weapons, even against the terrorists themselves. And he wondered, the foreign minister, how could Syria use chemical weapons at a time the Syrian army is advancing across the country, and also at a time when Syria is optimistic about the realization of the public opinion on the conspiracy targeting Syria. This is not the first time that the Syrian government is accused of using chemical weapons, but there has been no proof whatsoever on the Syrian government's use about that. Even Western countries were not able to prove that. But the Syrian foreign minister said that definitely there are goals behind this accusation campaign targeting the Syrian government. The goals could be changing, having Trump changing his priorities in Syria. As you know, previously during the election campaign of Trump, he said that his priority is not toppling Assad, but actually fighting terrorism. And at that time, President Bashar al-Assad made many comments about the rhetoric and about the comments of Trump when he was in his presidential campaign, saying that such comments it cannot be true right now. It cannot be believed, because at the end of the day, when the U.S. president gets into office, what is concerning the Syrian government is the policy that would be implemented on the ground, not what has been, of course, said in the electoral campaigns. And we have saw actually the proof right now. President Trump, U.S. President Trump, actually is not committing himself to the promises made in his presidential campaign, that the priority is not targeting the Syrian government, but fighting ISIL. He is doing the opposite right now. And finally, we have to confirm once again that the Syrian government, the Syrian foreign minister, made it clear many times during his press conference in the past 24 hours that Syria did not use and will never use chemical weapons, because it's not in its interest. And many experts believe that why would the Syrian government use a chemical weapon when regular weapons are actually destroying terrorists' hideouts? What happened was that in Khan Sheikhoun, there was a warehouse where terrorists of the Al-Nusra Front were storing their mortar shells, including chemical components over there. And the attack that targeted that warehouse led to such an explosion and the spread of those chemical elements that were stored by the Al-Nusra Front in that area. So once again, the Syrian government has said that this campaign of accusations against Syria definitely has goals, perhaps changing Trump's priority for striking Syria, or it could be because of the desperate attempts by the terrorists to advance, and the failure that happened over here, where they were speaking about Jobar or Hama. So such accusations and such a retaliation and a U.S. strike against the Syrian government comes only after the failure of the terrorists of the Al-Nusra Front and many other groups that are considered as so-called moderate opposition groups, after the failure of those groups in advancing in Hama countryside, northern countryside, and also recently here in Jobar at the end of the day.
Mohammed, you brought up a very good point, that the failure of the terrorists. So I was going to ask you, how do you think such accusations that are leveled against the Syrian government, and then this attack, this firing of 50 cruise missiles at an air base in Syria, how are these developments going to help the terrorists to regroup and reinforce themselves at a time when the Syrian government has been really successful in crushing the terrorists and eliminating them in most parts of the country?
Well, it is believed that such a U.S. attack is a message that the United States is backing, at the end of the day, those terrorist groups on the ground. What the U.S. is trying to say is that we will not allow the collapse of those groups that the U.S. has been supporting for a long time now on the ground, for toppling the Syrian president and undermining the Syrian army. Such strikes are aiming also at undermining the Syrian aerial capabilities, of course, in order to prevent any kind of a full defeat for the terrorists in the northern countryside of Hama over there. And because everyone knows that the Syrian army is now advancing strongly, whether in Homs countryside, in Palmyra recently, in Aleppo, and also in Hama countryside. Perhaps the United States is scared about the Syrian government's advances in the northern countryside of Hama, and perhaps a military operation towards Idlib, which is, of course, housing some of the most important, well-trained and equipped by the West terrorist organizations like the Al-Nusra Front, like Ahrar al-Sham, like many others that actually even took part in the Astana meetings that failed at the end of the day in its past and recent round of talks. So all of that fear by the United States that those terrorist groups could be collapsing and being eliminated fully by the Syrian army, of course backed by Hezbollah and Russia, that fear perhaps brought the United States to launch this attack recently here on Syrian military positions. It's a message by the United States that it will not allow any collapse of the terrorist groups that have been actually getting the support of the United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar for a long time now. But definitely such a development could perhaps lead to further escalation. It could lead to a direct confrontation between Russia and the United States. It also proves that perhaps there hasn't been any consensus yet between the United States and Russia in any kind of discussions, indirect, direct, or even secret discussions on Syria. It seems that the United States will be striking the Syrian government positions for the time being. And it could actually, as I told you, lead to further escalation. And of course, it will complicate the situation on ground. It will block political talks that have been going on in Geneva, also military talks in Astana. At the end of the day, such a development is a dangerous escalation in the war in Syria, as it is the first time since the start of the crisis 6 years ago that we see a U.S. direct airstrike or missile strike against the Syrian government